Love is in the air. Noble Knight is back again. And this time they've got a brand new coupon code for the month of February. Hey everybody, it's your old buddy Hambone, and Noble Knight has reached out and they've thrown another amazing discount code our way. This time the code is Love to Play. That is LOVETOPLAY. And it is good for $5 off any order of $25 or more running from February the 3rd through February the 29th. Now, our friends over at Noble Knight are absolutely amazing. And whether you are there to buy some RPGs, whether you're going to buy some classic games, board games, card games, dice games, Noble Knight's going to have what you're looking for. Now, this code is good for in-store or online, so you get the best of both worlds. If you're shopping online, this is a good way to get yourself $5 off an order of $25 or more. Or if you're lucky enough to live in walking distance or even driving distance, you can walk on up to the counter and use the code Love to Play to get $5 off any order of $25 or more. Now that is LOVETOPLAY, and this code is good from February 3rd to February 29th. So don't forget to use the code Love to Play at checkout at Noble Knight Games, and may the dice always roll in your favor.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. He said today we're going to talk about fantasy wargaming, and I said, but Stu, it's a mini episode. Stu Horvath.
Not all of it, not at once.
Yeah, I thought it was a bit of a broad topic at first, and then you were just like, no, Hambone, it's an actual game called Fantasy Wargaming.
It's just one book.
It's a little on the nose, though, you have to admit.
Wow. This is actually going to be a little bit of a mystery participation episode because there's a lot of stuff about this that I don't know and I haven't been able to find out. So if you, dear listeners, can throw any light on this, get in touch. I want to know.
Is this our Unsolved Mystery episode?
It is a little bit of an unsolved mystery.
I love it.
Yeah. So, Fantasy Wargaming by Bruce Galloway came out in 1981 in the UK and 82 in the US. It is a beautiful hardcover book. Let's start with the positives.
Okay.
The art by Lawrence Heath is fantastic. It's in that kind of weird, I can't quite exactly explain why UK fantasy art is different from US fantasy art, but this hits all of those Russ Nicholson kind of vibes for me. It's a little more cartoony. I think he does a fantastic job, and after this book, he apparently drops off the face of the planet forever. So mystery number one.
A mystery.
If you know anything about Lawrence Heath or what else he's done art for, let me know, because I would love to see more of it.
All right, what's mystery number two?
So we'll get to mystery number two in a minute. I just wanted to get all of the positives of this book out first.
Okay, can I just lead in with something here quick?
Yeah.
The title Fantasy Wargaming, my hot take on it immediately is I just imagine it's something that Higgins is playing. If like Higgins was going to play an RPG, it would be Fantasy Wargaming. It'd be some King Arthur shit, and he'd be like measuring out all his little miniatures and building like a bridge of matchsticks and burning it down.
You know, Hambone, there are episodes where Magnum stumbles into Higgins's study and there's, miniatures out. And he's working on like some wargaming stuff.
Maybe he is playing Fantasy Wargaming. The other hot take that I have on this is that like Fantasy Wargaming is just such a generic term. It's like the Mr. Pibb of RPGs.
Yeah, and for good reason. That is an absolutely accurate assessment just on the title. And like I said, I wanted to get all the positive stuff out. We're done with the positive stuff. That was it. We're all done.
Bring the pain.
So Bruce Galloway and his cohorts were, I believe, English private school kids. I'm not exactly sure how English schools work.
I imagine they're all dressed like Angus Young from AC/DC.
Yeah, like Eton boys. I don't know. So, yeah, uniforms, boarding school, getting whipped by the headmaster, that Morrissey song, the Smith song.
It all tracks.
Yeah. So Dungeons & Dragons comes out, and Bruce and his friends are into it because they were already into fantasy wargaming. They actually take issue with Dungeons & Dragons.
Why?
Because it wasn't historically accurate enough.
It's fantasy.
I know, it's right there in the title, but in the introduction, he actually gets upset about the idea of characters wearing armor that isn't historically appropriate for the sword that they're using. You know, like that's the kind of mindset that is going into this game.
He does know that right there on the cover of the book it says dragons, and dragons weren't real.
On the cover of his own book, he has a Baphomet coming off of the page in a wizard's study. I've never seen that happen in real life.
I would hope to never see that happen in real life.
I'd be kind of into seeing that happen in real life. It would solve a lot of my existential questions.
Yeah, I would hope it was the day I was not wearing khakis. But go on.
So the idea behind fantasy wargaming is it takes all of the, simulation-based ideas that Gary Gygax was working with and brings them to a new extreme.
Even more extreme than a chapter on halberds?
Yeah, dude, this book is so full of charts and complex rules, and there's nothing playable about it at all. I have no words. I really don't. It is so aggressively anti-player. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's not a challenge, dear listener. We're not challenging you to try to play this game. We are warning you. We're staving you off. We're being your friend.
Yeah, and it suffers from this weird pedantic position where he's very much like, this is how it's supposed to be. This is what the history is. And this is how you can successfully, simulate the history and bring in fantasy elements without ever being sort of just like, dude, just relax. Let people have fun. Why do we need to strive for historical accuracy in our fantasy world? Dude was a stiff, is basically what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Like Gary Gygax, this book is built out of some very idiosyncratic ideas. There's lots of little rules that get more and more fine-tuned, basically just because it was something that annoyed Bruce. And I wish that there was more of this. Unfortunately, Bruce Galloway was killed in a car crash not long after this book was published.
Oh my God, how terrible.
I know. I'm curious how this would have developed over time, because this is a much more hostile, unplayable version of D&D. I mean, it's called The Highest Level of All is the subtitle.
That is a really, really ambitious title.
He came out swinging, and he was just like, screw it, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to prove all these jokers wrong. Dungeons & Dragons is a false prophet. I'm going to do it right. I really, really wish that there was a second volume, because you see how D&D developed over time with play. How would have this developed? I'm interested in that.
Well, it sounds like no one would have been able to play it to develop it.
Well, I mean, that's certainly an argument.
It's a very what came first, the chicken or the egg argument, because, yes, could it have developed? You need people to actually play it to develop it. And the guy who wrote it doesn't like fun.
Yeah, no, this is definitely not a fun game. Fun is a 4-letter word for him. But you got to admit, it's a really nice hardcover book, especially for the period. I don't know much about the original publisher for the U.S., which is Stein & Day, but it looks like a legit publishing house, mainstream, traditional publishing house. And I know that the third edition was put out by Doubleday Books, which, again, standard traditional publisher. That was unusual to me because, mainstream publishers don't get into role-playing. But Bruce Galloway had enough hustle to get, a serious international publishing deal.
Which is crazy, because it actually looks like a textbook.
It does. It has a very textbook vibe.
If you held that up and I didn't get a good look at the cover with Baphomet on it, I would swear to God it was my social studies book. Or my U.S. history book.
Yeah.
Because it actually looks like a textbook. Now, granted, in essence, all RPG books are textbooks. Because, yes, there is a game between the covers. However, it's learning how to play the game. It's teaching you about the game. It is the game itself. So it's textbook for all intents and purposes.
Sure, yeah.
That legitimately looks like I would cover that in brown paper and put my name on it. Yeah, come on.
Got to draw a Metallica logo on it.
Yeah, exactly. But not on the front cover because, you know, Mrs. Stein will see you.
I actually just found a second positive thing on the back cover. There's a list of all the stuff that you're going to find inside, and one of the things that's listed is an index. And
that makes us hot.
Everything, as bad as this book is, at least it's indexed. What's interesting too is that despite the fact that he was striving for historical accuracy and no fun, he takes an awful lot of space to stat out prophets, angels, and God himself from the Bible.
Oh, wait.
Yes.
God has stats in this book.
God has stats in this book.
Stu, why don't you pop it open to God stats? And for our listeners at home and around the world, why don't you read what God's stats are?
Okay, so God, First, I think that it's worth pointing out that you actually have to turn the book sideways to get to this chart. They couldn't like squeeze it down so that it would fit on the pages. It's like God.
Now, in deities and demigods in D&D, you do have, in the original version, the Cthulhu mythos, which is a dark god. And then you do have, once you get to immortal stats in Dungeons and Dragons, things that are godlike per se. But you never actually get stats for capital G, O-D, God.
Yeah, the God of Abraham. Like, this is God. This is the Old Testament God. And most of the things that he has as higher powers, like, gods, are all derived directly from mythology and folklore. So, like, he's got a lot of goetic demons and like, nothing made up. This is all has to be from...
Well, some of our atheist friends might argue.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, the name of the power is God.
Capital G.
Yeah, his astrological controller, which seems like an unusual... I don't know what that means in the context of the system, but I don't think of any part of astrology controlling the God of Abraham, is Leo. His combat level's 24, which at a glance does appear to be the highest combat level listed.
I mean, I'd hope.
His intelligence is 40. Again, looks like the highest. Then there's a bunch of question marks. Endurance, agility, physique, mana, magic level, faith, all question marks. His resistance to appeals is 7, which...
Sounds low.
It's tied with Michael. Archangel Michael also has a 7. The Virgin Mary has a 5. Gabriel has a 6. John the Baptist has a 5. Like, what is this? I don't understand.
Okay.
And his rank in the host is 9, which I guess is the highest.
Right.
Areas of interest and patronage is creation and dominance. Areas of disfavor is rebellion, also making sense.
It all tracks.
Special characteristics and notes. He has 3 persons, cannot operate independently.
Does he have an Old Testament and New Testament power, or no?
No, it looks like the New Testament with the 3 personas bit. It's like God, Son, and Holy Ghost. So if you want to ever use God, here's a baseline for you to convert stats.
But there's not a whole lot of stats and information there.
No. It's interesting.
Big move.
I love the fact that the Virgin Mary is the next one listed.
Oh, wait. There's actual stats for the Virgin Mary?
Yeah, she's got a combat level of 10. Go figure.
Well, moms are badasses.
True.
And to all our mom listeners out there, you're the best. We couldn't do it without you. So, I give a mom a tough, fighting stat. But it's just weird that she's in there. It's weird that God's in there.
Yeah, it's a really strange approach.
So wait, is Jesus in there?
He's counted as God.
Okay.
He's part of that ambiguous stat set.
Oh, poor Father Fitzgerald, wherever his ears are ringing. He'd probably have a shitstorm if he knew that there was a game where you could have God as a playable character.
In the Hellboy stories, Mike Mignola has always just avoided it because it's a headache that you don't want, right? Like, you're treading on stuff that people believe, whether you do or not. Like, you don't need that headache.
He'd break the game.
Yeah.
Well, I can totally see why this book did not sell at all.
Well, I mean, it sold well enough to get 3 editions, one of which through Doubleday.
Right, but in the grand scheme of things, no one's heard of this game.
No.
And really, what is selling enough to go through 3 printings? Because when you look at the complete history of RPGs, one thing that you never see on any list is Fantasy Wargaming.
I believe this copy was found for me by my friend Brian Taylor in the Half Price Books in Pittsburgh, and he got it for like $5 and sent it to me. He's like, "This is a laugh,"
Oh, it certainly is.
Yeah. But here's the other mystery. So, Fantasy Wargaming apparently spun out of a role-playing game session called Leigh Cliffs, Leigh. It was a weekender game in a village where there was like a mysterious happening thing, and it sounds like it was sort of like a LARP.
Really?
Yeah. After Galloway died, of course, like a lot of this stuff went missing, and it's hard to track down people to ask them about a game that they played one weekend in 1980, But I've heard differing things, that it was sort of like what we would consider like a fantasy LARP. I've also heard that it was a weekend-long kind of murder mystery, like a murder mystery dinner.
So definitely not an orgy.
Definitely. Well, it
was the 70s. Early 80s.
You never know.
Key party.
So what it doesn't sound like is Fantasy Wargaming. But in the introduction of this, he mentions Leigh Cliffs as a forthcoming Fantasy Wargaming product. He definitely was going to try and release this, and I'm just dying to know what that was like. So, mystery number 2. If you know anything about Leigh Cliffs, and that's whether you know anything about the manuscript that was going to follow Fantasy Wargaming, or if you know anything about the session that was played in this English village in 1980 over one weekend, I want to know. I'm so interested in this. I'm so interested in finding out what Leigh Cliffs was like, because it sounds so not like Fantasy Wargaming, what that became, like this really crazy rules-heavy thing. It sounds like Leigh Cliffs was like a really fun social event among some college kids, you know?
So all the fun that he wasn't having playing Fantasy Wargaming, he put into Leigh Cliffs.
Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like. And there is that era tragedy around that. Like, I just feel generally bad, you know, like I kind of bagged on this on the feed, and then I found out later that he was dead. Like, it died really soon after this.
Yeah, that's terrible.
It's still a part of the history, and it was a definite reaction to early role-playing games that's interesting to me. And I think his reaction is something that you see in the OSR movement. It's just like, oh, D&D's doing it wrong. Let me build my own game. Like, and it goes back all the way to 1979, 80.
Well, there you go. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Fantasy Wargaming?
It's a weird book, but it is so worth it to have on your shelf. It's never expensive. You can get it for like $4 or $5 if you see it in a thrift store. And it's totally worth it for the art. I think that the art is fantastic.
Well, dear listener, we brought up some mysteries today. And that said, what's not a mystery is if you're looking for more vintage RPG, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/vintagerpg. You get unboxing videos, you have access to early release episodes, and some really interesting literary stuff as they come available.
Yep.
All right, before we go home on this episode, Zine Quest is still going strong, and one of my all-time favorite artists, Marie Enger, has a zine out now called Casketland. Now, this is the second version of Casketland. It's called Kruik, and it's a pretty neat game. It's a bleak occult western RPG. Now, it's meant to be played with friends in just one session, and it is powered by the Apocalypse engine, which just sounds cool to say. Now, the core rules are free for everyone and can be downloaded at casketland.com. The new edition, however, is coming out through Kickstarter with Zine Quest, and what it is a brutal cross between Southwestern Gothic, the Dust Bowl, Mad Max, and Vampire Hunter D. Casketland centers around a dying town cut off by rows of caskets and vicious monsters unearthed by extreme drought and brutal winds. Now, you're not a valiant hero in Casketland. You're just trying to survive the end of times. So if that sounds like it wets your whistle, definitely head on over to the Kickstarter for Casketland and think about pledging to Marie. She's an awesome artist. She's a pal. And for just $5, you can get in on Casketland Kruik. You can get the PDF of the game. Higher tiers include things like prints, and in some tiers, item cards from both Kruik and Homestead, the original Casketland game. So, folks, I can't speak highly enough about zines. I grew up in New Jersey in the punk rock scene, and when you went to shows, you had people selling records, you had people selling tapes, and you had kids who would just make homemade zines of their own. And now what's even cooler is the zines actually have games inside of them that you can play. So definitely think about checking out Casketland Kruik on Kickstarter now, running through February 25th. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can people find you?
They can find me every day on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting about Vintage RPG stuff.
Very cool. You could find me on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire, where I post my day-to-day adventures and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that happens with the Vintage RPG Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons & Dragons. I tweet about professional wrestling mostly. And you could also check out my other podcast, My Thai Happy Hour. It's pop culture for weirdos wherever podcasts are found. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.